Possibly allocate. So hello, everyone. Welcome to Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Tokenization Working Group meeting for April 23rd, 2025. Ron Quarante here. It's good to see you all. We've got a special guest presentation. A couple of really quick announcements. Obviously, please keep in mind that this working group meeting, like all of our working group meetings, are subject to both our confidentiality and antitrust policies, and that nothing discussed is accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. And obviously, the opinions expressed are our own, not necessarily those of our respective firms. This session is being recorded, so if you have questions for Jen, please hold them to the end. The last 5 or 10 minutes we will carve out for Q&A with Jen Clark. We can do that either through the group chat or we can unmute you and have you speak as well. With that, I will stop talking and turn the session over to Jen Clark. Jen, welcome. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ron. Good morning, everybody, or hello, depending on your time. I'm Jen Clark. I'm a director at EisnerAmper, and I've worked on technology teams primarily in startups for the past 17 years, delivering enterprise software to a wide range of industries. So I've worked in fintech, I've worked in HR tech, done a little bit of digital health and benefits. And I've focused on data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence product leadership for the past decade and built intelligent systems at scale in e-commerce environments. So this AI topic is a passion of mine. It's been my career focus. And I joined Eisner last year, and I assist clients with AI now, in addition to our internal advisory group. So I'm excited to be with you here today and to kind of talk about this really kind of meaty topic. So, usually I like to start with a pretty provocative quote. And this one felt appropriate, especially for what we're going to be talking about today. One thing that I wanted to point out about this particular quote is this happened not too long ago. This is almost 2 years to the date. It's a good reminder when we're in the AI space to remind ourselves that we are still dealing with an emerging technology, despite kind of its speed and pace. But this is a little bit different than when Microsoft released Tay on Twitter. This is when they kind of first opened up Bing, which is kind of now turned into Copilot for the web. But this is also a nice reminder that AI is a tool, albeit a very powerful one, but it is a bit unpredictable and it matters how you use it. So again, early, new. I don't think we don't have to worry about the robots just yet, but we do have to watch them. So, today I wanted to kind of 4 main topics, right? Is one, set some just like basic foundations on. I like to give everybody kind of a clean definition of AI, some practical applications, both in kind of work environments and kind of your day-to-day. And then we're going to kind of get into our community intersections, right? Is like there's a little bit of AI crypto tension. I'll touch a little bit on those. But then let's start talking about like practical applications, right? How can you all use AI? And then what opportunities are there to use things like blockchain in AI infrastructure? And like we said, I'm going to try to leave at least 15 minutes for questions at the end, because I know this is a really deep and wide topic. So first, with the foundation. Like I said, I like to start with a definition, even though no one can really agree on just one. Increasingly, AI is meant to only describe kind of generative or agentic AI. More traditional technologies that have fallen under that umbrella, like rules-based systems, RPA as an example, or even machine learning, are kind of colloquially being kicked out from underneath that umbrella, even though it has traditionally included those things. For the purposes of my talk today, I am usually referring to generative or agentic. That matters because the way we implement and control risks with these systems are different than kind of more traditional approaches. So to give you a little bit of sense of what I mean when I say generative, so generative is your ChatGPTs, your Claudes, your Google Geminis, and generative AI is a specific type of deep learning that doesn't just analyze data, right? It creates totally new content. So what it does at its very basic, very over kind of simplifying this, but it learns patterns and instructions from these massive data sets and then generates, hence the name, outputs based on that learning. So for example, if you give it thousands of pictures of people or even millions or billions, it can generate an entirely new synthetic face that never existed. So soapbox here, just a general warning that I like to give everybody, regardless of kind of their comfort in the AI space, is that AI is not infallible, right? It does not know all the answers. Again, way oversimplifying here, but what generative is doing is kind of like the next kind of predictor. So whether that be the next pixel or the next word, right? It's doing that kind of at scale in a really complex way. But it doesn't actually know the answer, right? It's not a search engine. It's not looking up an answer for you. It does hallucinate. It can just completely make up things and you will find it the more you use it. But I always like to give that example because there's, or kind of give that warning, because I think in some of the applications that have rolled out with generative from the very beginning have kind of treated it like a search engine, but it is like fundamentally different. And so the way that you have to apply it is different. You sort of have to think about the kind of risks associated with something that's a bit ambiguous. So we'll get into that kind of the complexity. So again, like I said, in terms of AI, there are really kind of three ways you can express yourself to a computer. You can give it instructions, often through just code, computer code. You can give it examples and have it identify patterns, or you can talk to it. This is where the complexity comes in. So in traditional automation like RPA, or even just a simple rules-based system, the input and output is one-to-one, right? I'm coding one workflow, I'm automating one tasks. And even though I can run that an infinite number of times, I can't really reuse that code for another workflow. With machine learning or giving a computer any, examples to learn from, you start to move from one-to-one to one-to-many. Right? I have one machine learning model that describes, kind of part of the universe or the environment, and it can provide many outputs within those set boundaries. With generative, I now move into a many-to-many problem. I can ask, pretty much seemingly endless set of questions or even variations of questions, and I can get just as many answers back. So as we remove the rigidity of communication or increase the flexibility with which we communicate with a machine, we have an inverse relationship with control. The easier it is to tell a machine what I want it to do, the more ambiguous of an output I will get. And so this is kind of the primary tension that we're seeing in the market right now, the implementation gap. It's really easy to pilot generative and AI agentic tools. It is very hard to scale them because as soon as you add volume, you add that ambiguity as well. I have to give credit here to Cassie. I saw her, she was the first decision scientist at Google. I saw her at a conference recently. This, and along with the next slide that I'll show you, I kind of adapted from her talk because I just thought it was just such a simplistic way of looking at this problem. All right, so I'm going to give you a tangible example of this. So each one of you is now an AI system, and your job is to label this as cat or not cat. And I promise this isn't a trick question, right? So you can feel free to add your answer to the chat or just kind of think to it, think about it in your head. This, again, not a trick question. This is as straightforward as it seems. So I'll just give you a second, reflect on it. Okay, but what about this one, right? Is it cat or not cat? And like most of you, my reaction is going to be to ask, well, in what context, right? And if you're the AI system, it matters if you're labeling cat or not cat as appropriate to have a domestic pet, right? So this would be not cat, or it's just for, zoo purposes, in which case this might be a cat. right? So generative introduces this kind of level of ambiguity, and the questions that we ask it and the tasks we give it become very, very important in how we articulate it. So I've kind of already mentioned the implementation gap a little bit, but this recent study from Pew Research Center is excellent, even if you have just 5 minutes to kind of review the charts. It's really, it kind of speaks to where we are in the AI market, right? About a third of US adults say that they've used some kind of chat system, but 98% of AI experts have, and I would really question the 2% that haven't if they call themselves an AI expert. This is really to say, and I hate the kind of term bubble, but the people that live, breathe, eat AI and every day sort of have a different perspective than most people in the US, right? As there is this tension of it's so easy, it's available, we can start rolling out. But that's just not the case, right? We sort of have to bring people along. This is very similar. So I used to work at a public library at the reference desk. I was the like technical help in college. And I remember when like this was like when Google was first starting to like really roll out its like email tools and its like personal kind of productivity tools. And the as sort of a digital native, it was really, I sort of took these things for granted, but the amount of people that would come in that just like had never heard of Gmail, knew what email was, could open Gmail, like was really stark and would often help people with, their resumes and their work applications. And I see a lot of similarities here, right? Is like there's a really big divide, and we have to be very cautious about how we proceed. But there's an AI for that. It is there's a new set of tools announced almost every day. There's of course the frontier models and the chat systems. But really, I mean, I cannot tell you can all imagine how many things I get in my inbox a day is like, have you seen this new AI tool? And a lot of them won't stick around, right? As like it being a little bit of an old hat, having worked in software as a service my entire career, wrapping a UI around ChatGPT really isn't a solution, right? But there will be tools that stick around because they solve actual problems thoughtfully with AI. Most of the ones I've listed here I've used in some manner. Some of my favorites, Perplexity, probably no surprise. I am partial to ChatGPT only because its consumer tools are so friendly, but a lot of my colleagues really love the way that Claude answers things. Grammarly is also just like a really powerful tool just when you need to check something. I've used that for years. If all of the images in this presentation is actually created in Midjourney. Highly recommend that tool. It's not cheap, but it's really kind of mind-boggling what it can produce when you get used to it. And just some fun ones, some music ones. Companions I call out, even though I haven't used. These are starting to get a lot more press. Tricky, like not so great side effects of people really kind of becoming like dependent on these type of systems. So I think there's a lot of socio-technical issues that we'll see kind of in the next few years. But if you want to accomplish something, there's likely an AI tool that does it. But so there are, just about as many AI tools as you can imagine. I typically will limit myself to just a few. I use Midjourney, I use Perplexity, and I use ChatGPT, or in work context, I use Copilot for the web, which is backed by ChatGPT. And so how do you use them well, right? That many to many problem. I often talk with a lot of folks that say like, I use these systems and I'm just like not impressed, right? And so the kind of first rule of using these tools well is you have to give generative systems context, and a lot of it. It will provide much better answers, and I'll actually walk you through a framework next that you can use. But the takeaway is like as much detail as possible. It cannot read your mind, at least not yet. You have to explain what you're trying to do. And this really has to do with the way that these models work. So you have to kind of guide it, and this is, again, a gross oversimplification. You have to guide it to the right pocket of context so that you can interact with that localized knowledge. You wouldn't ask a musician to do your taxes. So in the same way, you kind of need to guide the model to what knowledge you need. The second rule I like to give people is just to experiment. One of my favorite quotes is that the models you use today will be the worst models you interact with in your lifetime. They're getting better constantly. So if something doesn't work today, it does not mean that it won't work, tomorrow or in 2 weeks, right? Is experiment, try again, try it in a different way, try a different system, try a different tool. So this prompt, it's my prompt that I've used for a long time, over 5 years. And this is my unicorn alligator. And so typically I use this with image generation, but I've tried to start to use it in the video tools, and I do use it in text contexts sometimes. But basically what I do is like it's a quick way for me to see how sophisticated the tool is. When this first started, what I used to get, there was like this like research tool many years ago that you could go to online. It was like this little bot, and you sort of gave it phrases, and it was like the early days of generative. And it would give me like this crayon representation of this like unicorn on the side and this kind of like weird alligator looking thing in the other. Like a 5-year-old drew it. And this is what Gemini gave me over a year ago now. So I can't even imagine what it must look like today. Um, the point being is that, if you sort of take this like scientific approach to using these tools, you'll find that one, you'll get much better output in the long term. But two, you'll begin to understand how much more capable they are when you start using it in similar ways. So the framework that I mentioned, this is kind of like a recipe. You can use this over and over again if you just think about the frame. So when you're interacting with these systems, you typically kind of want to give it at least 3 things, and then the fourth is a bonus. So the first one is really its persona. So who is it, right? It's not necessarily like a person, but like think of like a job description, right? You're an expert in strategic FP&A. You're an AI expert, you're a governance expert, right? And the more specific you can be on that, the better answer you will get, right? That's like honing in on that localized knowledge. The second is who is the output for? So I want to present to an executive audience. I'm talking to kindergartners. I'm working with a group of HR leaders, right? My favorite one that I use over and over and over again is an executive audience with a 10th grade reading level. And that is, what that does is it keeps it very concise, it removes all the jargon, and it keeps the language very simple. And then the output, right, is I want 10 questions, I want 2 bullet points, I want a recommendation, I want 3 paragraphs, whatever it may be, right? You have to tell it exactly what you want in the output that you're trying to get. The fourth one, the bonus, is really something that folks I don't quite use enough, and it does take a little bit of practice, but it's this critique and adapt, right? The benefit of these systems is just like the scale, right? It doesn't have any kind of limitations to the perspective it is providing you. So you can basically ask it to either recommend or break anything, right? So give me 3 recommendations and tell me which one won't work 5 years into the future. Or based on this proposal I've put together, tell me what goes wrong in 5 years. Or give me kind of 3 different perspectives and give me kind of the critiques to each, or like objection handling for each, right? This is really where you can kind of get that like multi-sided die. And this is really where I think it's a really great thought partner, and most folks treat it kind of easily use like a search engine, but this is where the real power comes from. So again, persona, audience, output, every time you deal with it, and then your kind of critique and adapt is your bonus. All right, so now for the fun part. Let's talk about kind of AI and crypto and DeFi, kind of overlapping, right? Wanted to kind of address some of the tensions at the start of this, right? The big one first. AI, like most consumer tech, is centralized. A few major players, really opaque model ownership, consolidated compute needs. OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic, for the most part, hold the keys. When we implement these systems, we use their APIs, we tune against their systems, right? They have total control over those models. I know I don't have to preach to the choir here, but that is fundamentally different than decentralized blockchain, crypto, DeFi, right? And I point this out only to say that it's an important aspect to consider when thinking through how we can apply both technologies in either direction, right? This is kind of a core tension to how some of the frameworks were set up from the start, but it doesn't necessarily have to exist in applications. One kind of nuance that I also wanted to point out is, open source versus decentralized. So increasingly, there are AI models and frameworks that are going open source. Meta's Llama is a great example of that. However, those models, they're much more transparent. They allow the community to participate and make updates, but the ownership is still centralized, right? That doesn't change anything. And we'll likely see, I expect this to increase, right? We'll likely see an increase in open source AI as AI matures. But it is definitely, open source is not decentralized. All right, so again, I hope you guys can get a sense that like sort of tackle the big things head first and head on. I wanted to mention the compute problem. So this is very real. This is not kind of a thing that's, people are waving their arms. This is a real thing that we're gonna have to solve for. AI is extremely computationally intensive with very specific hardware requirements. And I'm sure no one in this room has any clue what that's like, right? So when we talk about combining these two frameworks, we compound our resource constraints. I don't know if there are easy answers here outside of kind of like major architecture improvements, which I do think will happen. But this is kind of like current state where we are, right? There's like a real tension here with computing. In quantum, just because I feel as though I would be remiss to brush past it. I'm no expert. I do not claim to be. But just in case you're not familiar, again, grossly oversimplified explanation. But traditional chips are like a switch. So they can be like 0 or 1, either like a coin or like a light switch. You can think like it can be one state or the other. AI chips, GPUs, again, grossly oversimplified, but they work in teams. And so they can flip kind of mini switches at once, depending on sort of the compute needed. Quantum computing, or qubits, can kind of exist in the same state simultaneously. So it was once explained to me, it's like if you think about a coin, right? It's like one or the other, and GPUs is like you'd be able to flip a bunch of coins over at one time. It's like spinning a coin, right? It can be 0 and 1 at the exact same time. So you don't have to be an expert to understand kind of the power that unlocks and the implications it has if or when someone cracks quantum, right? And so again, I just kind of mentioned it because it should sort of always be in the back of our heads as we think about kind of theory in the future and where these things are going, especially as we think about investments in talent, and long-term applications. But this is something that we're just constantly going to have to keep in the back of our mind. Which kind of leads me to my next point, right? Our communities are better together. I know that there's a battle for kind of talent and investment, but we're going to have to figure out these new paradigms together. I encourage everyone that I talk with, and it's a wide range of people, not to get overly attached to a particular idea or framework, because the chances that it will stick around in this acceleration of technical innovation is slim to none, right? There are very few systems and ways of doing things that we will not have to reimagine. And our communities are poised to do that. And we have a lot of great ways of looking at the world that we will need as we move forward in this new kind of frontier. But back to the practical, right? So wanted to talk through AI use cases. And before I get kind of into each of the kind of the large themes that I was seeing as I was researching this, a kind of caveat is that, again, not a surprise probably to most of you in the room, but the big promises that a lot of that you're seeing in the press and the news aren't in the day-to-day yet, right? Is like a lot of these things are still emerging, and a lot of these things are still kind of hard to do practically. And so how I've structured some of these use case is the things that you could get started with today. We'll start those first, and then I'll go through and go talk towards more emerging and things that I think will get easier over time. So the first is, really kind of what I consider like generative sweet spot is AI as assistants and researchers. This is everything from, proposal analysis, health dashboards. You can analyze the sentiment of your community. You can do kind of vote simulation or some kind of data simulation. And most just like consumer chat systems can accomplish this, right? Your ChatGPTs, your Geminis, your Claude will be able to handle any of these use cases. You will have to give it a lot of context. You will probably have to give it data, but it can handle it. The caveat here that I will, again, this is what I tell everybody, just be sure you're in a private environment. I think that's best case, I think everybody sort of understands that now. But if you're just using sort of ChatGPT, even if you're logged in, if you're not paying for it, your data can go back into the public model to train. So always be cautious, know what type of environment you're in, know where your data is going. But as long as you're in, what we consider kind of a walled garden where your data isn't being shared back with that public model, these are great things to kind of use AI for. The caveat here is that linking actions is still very difficult and requires a developer, right? I can't just feed it without kind of building something, right? There's some kind of off-the-shelf. Microsoft has some off-the-shelf tools. There's like a bunch of kind of like automation software that does some of these things. It's still hard. It's really hard and clunky. But I can't just like give it data and do a lot of things after it, right? As I sort of have to manually link those things together. That will get easier over time. But for now, that's like today, if you go out after this discussion and start using it, that's what you're going to experience. Anyone that is saying that it is not is usually still talking about sort of like traditional automation, that instruction box, right? And while there are some like no code solutions, they're clunky. And so linking actions is still really hard in terms of like true AI. And I use that true in quotes. The second, and again, this is going back to that critique and adapt in the framework, right? AI is a thought partner. This is one of my favorite current ways of using. Like unique and distinctive approaches to really complicated and complex strategy questions, like just asking it like, I'm trying to figure out, you're an expert, I'm trying to figure out this hard problem, help me, look at 10 different angles. So depending on what system you use, you're going to have to tell it to give you references from the web. Especially if, you know, you kind of want to make sure that you're like linking back to like reputable sources. But this is really undervalued. It can really help you think through things, and especially in many cases where we're often, I expect that's true of most folks in this room, where you're sort of often the expert or sort of the specialist. Having a tool like this where it can sort of be a peer is really, really powerful. Um, the other kind of side of this is it is increasingly really great at being a technician. And what I mean by that is like writing code, right? Or writing some like complicated logic, right? I run a small team of engineers, and their ability to take pretty much what it started with is I have code. I need to write more code like this. And it, you know, GitHub Copilot is the tool that they use. And it would do that pretty simply. They'd have to make some tweaks. In the last, I'd say, couple of months, it's gone to, it's, you know, it's trained on our code. I have this business requirement. I need these 3 things in a technical design. Can you start the code for me? And it will do that. I mean, it's really kind of unbelievably powerful in this area. So again, in worlds where we have really complex logic, we have really complex code, this is an excellent place to use it. Again, still needs to be human reviewed. It can still be wrong. But again, just like getting you off of that blank page, it is an awesome way to accomplish it. Same caveats here. Private environment, you always want to make sure linking your actions is still really difficult, but this is a great place. So now kind of moving more to emerging. So this is not just specific to kind of crypto and DeFi. This is increasingly across all industries, right? AI is a monitor of some sort to really kind of monitor events and flag risk, fraud, you know, kind of like sketchy activity. The big thing that you have to be comfortable with here, and again, this is why I consider this more emerging, is that this solve is really like, depending on the context, you're talking about like a 60 to 80% solve, right? It's going to flag a lot of things. It's going to catch things that a human wouldn't have catch. It's going to be able to do it at volume, at scale, at speed, but it's not going to catch everything. And understanding why it flags something, depending on sort of the complexity of the model underneath, can't be nearly impossible. So, you know, caveat that when you're sort of in these contexts, you sort of have to be aware of that. Most of these solutions are still technically complex. And by that, I mean, as a non-developer, I used to code. I have not done so in over 10 years. No one would trust me with code. As a non-developer, I cannot go in and implement a lot of these frameworks. You need an engineer to do this. But what I'm also seeing, especially in your space, is that these like automation frameworks, so again, that instruction kind of rung of how you talk to a computer, they exist already, which can actually accelerate these like intelligent applications, right? Is what you're going to find is in these kind of like governance frameworks, they're going to implement sort of intelligence into their frameworks. And that is a great model, right? Because you sort of have a lot of people looking at it, a lot of people dealing with the ambiguity, and sort of a lot of eyes on it. So that's always encouraging. I tend to see sort of a speeding up about like AI applications when that is the case. So this is emerging, proceed with caution, but this is definitely a place to sort of pay attention to and experiment. This one is the largest caveat that I'll give of all. My general disclaimer when I talk about agents is that the creators of agents are still debating their implementation frameworks and definitions online, right? So we are very, very, very emerging. AI's agents are still extremely, extremely new despite very large claims, right? These are very ambiguous, very hard to implement at scale, very resource intensive. But again, sort of as a thing to keep an eye on as emerging technology, these are kind of the technology that could act through either rules or inference, right? So you think about that instruction examples prompt. There are frameworks that do this with instructions, right? There's just through rules. Pay attention to this market. When it does this thing, make this trade, right? But increasingly there's a bucket of tools that do this through like inference, right? It's like keeping track of the sentiment of the news, taking in kind of the sentiment of the community, also watching the markets, right? It's like they're taking in a lot of data. And they could act on top of that. So the biggest thing that outside of just still being new, technically complex, the two differences here that I will point out for this group is you really have to know what you're dealing with in this space. So read your T's and C's, right? Know if you're dealing with a sort of bot that's rule-based or if you're dealing with something that's generative and will infer. Know how it's interacting with your wallet, your vault, your community, whatever it is. Really understand the data exchange. Be hyper cautious here. The other thing that I'm noticing or noticed a lot of when I was doing this research is there are some concerns that these tools, because they are emerging, are likely to kind of give the same advice at scale, which can cause these like really dramatic swings in the market. And so another thing that you kind of want to pay attention to is like how personalized is the advice. And so we want to be really cautious there as well. And then, as I mentioned, these tools are going to come and go, right? They might not be around for a long time. So you also just kind of want to, pay attention to that. So here's another place where proceed with caution, experiment, do your due diligence, but I think still has a lot of promise, but we're not even scratching the surface yet. Okay, so other side of the coin, and I'm kind of cognizant of time that flew by. Using blockchain as AI infrastructure. How do you start to provide transparency to a very opaque system? And this is again where you'll hear my my caveat, right? Is AI at scale is a really tricky, messy problem that we have not figured out yet. The focus and the investments have been on building extremely powerful kind of, approaching that like general AI, general intelligence, right? Is like this AI that can do everything. But now we have to actually figure out how to apply it. That's the hard part. They're hard to scale well. They usually require like flipping the problem on its head. This is like true transformation, and honestly, like it feels like the new frontier. We're just scratching the surface. We haven't even started to get. I talk to a lot of clients. Most of the clients that I talk to are still in that like instructions bucket. They're still in that like simple automation needs. This really requires kind of intensive thought to apply this technology, where you can actually get an ROI. And again, just a reminder, we have not solved this yet. So this is something that we'll have to contend with. So can we use blockchain to enforce aspects of governance in the AI frame or ecosystem? And I actually think this is very promising. It's an uncomfortable truth that we won't be able to solve AI at scale with humans in the loop, right? Is like you can't sort of exponentially increase intelligence and speed and still be able to govern with humans, right? It's like we're going to have to be really thoughtful about that. And the answer to that to date has been just to let AI monitor, right? Which is kind of frankly terrifying. So, the other aspect of this, which I increasingly am spending more time kind of in healthcare, is, models update at unknown times with unknown data by unknown developers, right? And AI technology providers typically, not always, push this liability or this ambiguity, again, to go back to our earlier slide, onto buyers. And so to give you kind of a practical example in the healthcare space, right, is you implement this new technology, maybe it's some form of imaging, and you tested it, you ran it through kind of some trials, it looks great. Your clinicians start using it, and then all of a sudden, the model developer, which again, centralized, they're usually big shops, pushes an update. Or in most cases, they're based on some frontier model and also have some kind of like additional kind of model either on top or interacting with it. One or both of those models update. You don't know that it updated. All of a sudden, your results are different. And you have to contend with that, right? It's like, what does that mean? We haven't even scratched the surface to the implications of when we apply AI to healthcare, to legal, to finance, right? Is really something that we're going to have to figure out. And then the other kind of big problem that falls into this category is, synthetic or generative AI, like that fake content that it produces, at global scale. What does it mean to have, to be produced authentically or with some kind of trust or certification with references, right? Is like to be bound with some kind of truth. That is something we have not solved for, right? And again, when I think about blockchain, when I think about smart contracts, there's a there, right? There's a seed. There's something that can be solved for, even though, the complexity of the two frameworks together and the compute problem, but there's something there, right? And there's a seed that needs to be solved. So I think there's a lot of promise. The other kind of aspect of this is, kind of tokenized AI economies and marketplaces, which could be anything, right? It could be data sets, it could be personalized, like smaller models, APIs, the weights and the inferences that you use on top of them. It could be the actual compute, right? It can be just about any kind of aspect of the AI ecosystem. And I am less bullish on this application. As we've talked through, the compute problem is there. We already, in both of our communities, we have usability problems, but adding extra complexity is going to do nobody any favors. But I think more importantly, and the thing that we're still going to have to solve for again at scale, is that technology, and having worked in it for as long as I have, has this kind of expectation of open access, but also prestige, right? So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kaggle, but it's sort of this like data science competition website that was started forever ago now, it feels like. And there's like not only like real money, but real opportunities that are created from that. Like, I am the developer that solved this thing, right? And so you get this, like, again, going back to kind of the core tension of the two frameworks. There's some like cultural differences when you start talking about these like tokenized economies and marketplaces, which again, not unsolvable, but just like harder to kind of get over that initial kind of hump and solve at scale. And again, there are some examples of this, but really just like very, very emerging. So kind of some key takeaways: experiment daily, be aware of what systems you're using and if you're, how they're using your data and if you're in kind of a public or private instance. But this is really powerful and really the only way that you kind of learn the where. It's one of my favorite researchers is Ethan Mullick. He has a great book. If you have, I'm going to blank, Co-Intelligence is the name on it. But he talks about this jagged frontier, right? Is like, it's generative is like really, really great at some things and then really terrible at others. And the only way you kind of like really understand that is if you play around with it. Our communities are better together. We're really smart people. We're used to solving really hard problems, but we're going to have to work at it together. AI and crypto and DeFi context, really just proceed with caution. Be aware of what tools you're using. Read your T's and C's. I really think that this is still emerging, but a place to experiment and to learn from. And then using kind of blockchain or really thinking about kind of that framework of smart contracts in AI is, I think it's a blue sky opportunity and it's still something to explore. So with that, I will turn it over to questions.
Jen, thank you so much. I really love the slide deck. I know David Wysocki has already kicked off with a question, but anyone who has questions, please do the quick hand raise. David, do you want to state your question for Jen and kind of walk us through your thought?
I appreciate it. Thank Jen. This was the best seminar I've attended for a very, very long time.
Oh,
So,
thank you
so,
so much.
so thank you for that. Um, my question just is, I'm not smart enough to know what people are doing in this space, but it becomes, pretty clear that when you have a system that generates some output, there's going to be tension between the provider, the system's entitlement to use
Mhm.
or own, and
Yes.
the end user's desire to monopolize, commercialize. So how is that shaping out? From what the little that I've read, it seems to be unsettled, but I figured you will know way more than anything that I could find on the web. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, that's a great question. It is still to be settled. Now, there have been some early indications in copyright regulation that are suggesting that anything you co-create with AI is yours. Um, I think that that will likely proceed to be the case until it becomes financially sort of imperative for the model companies to claw that back, right? So again, that's sort of like that inherent tension of I have a centralized model that you're using that is providing all this intelligence. I'm just not going to stop at ownership with you just like using the API, right? There's going to be implications for that, even though I think in the sort of interim, there's going to be, I think there's this movement to say that it is like the person that created it. But way more to come there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's framing the issue and the fact that it's unresolved
Yes,
is helpful. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Jen, I've got a question for you if I could.
Yeah.
I know you and I in prep, we chatted a bit about prompt, and one of the things that concerns me is it feels like there's a big gap in what I'll broadly call prompt education or prompt training. And I know you started touching on that here. Can you dive into that a little bit more? And I'll give you a real world example. I just tested out Claude and ChatGPT on can you create 1,000 words on cosmology? I don't know, something. Never gets me 1,000 words. It gets me 500, might get me 700. And it seems to struggle with certain levels of specificity. Is that a prompt problem? Did I prompt it incorrectly, or why does that come out that way?
So that's twofold. And you're right that we, again, going back to that, 98% of AI experts have used it and only about a third of US adults. That's a twofold problem. One is that generative systems, especially chat systems and LLMs, are really bad at word count because they actually don't have any concept of that. They deal in tokens, so parts of words. And so they have no concept of how many words come out of them. So that's one side of the problem. So one of it is like just more general AI education on how generative works at like a really understandable level. The other side of it is context, right? Is the adding additional context about like who it should act like and the audience that you're providing it for really will help fill it out. But a lot of it is like in art and science, right? It's just trial and error. It's just practice.
Jen, thanks so much. For everyone else who's still on the call, again, thank you all for being here. If you've got questions for Jen, I've got about 15 others, but David's not gonna let me monopolize the call. Please let Jen know. Grateful for your thoughts. Jen, will you be able to provide the deck? Is that something you're comfortable with?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. And you mentioned a book as well. I'm sorry, could you remind me of the book and what it's about?
Yes, Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mullick. It is an excellent introduction. He's also, you can find him on LinkedIn. He posts multiple times a day. I follow him because he is, as I hope you all could tell, I'm a practical, I'm like an in the world person, right? And he has this approach of this is a new thing and we need to experiment with it and in real world context. And he's just like, he just kind of takes the hot air out of the room. So he's one of my favorites.
Thank you so much. Other questions or comments from anyone? I was not joking that I had 15, Jen, so I've got another one for you.
Yes, please.
You mentioned hallucinations, and we see this in the news a lot. Can you help me understand the derivation or the genesis of that? There, when we talk about a human being having a hallucination, for the most part, a lot of that is predicated on information that's already in their mind in some way, shape, or form, barring physiological issues or mental illness. But what is an actual AI hallucination? And I guess the sophomore question for me is why?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So again, this is like a twofold problem. So I'll tell you sort of what it is, and then I'll give you a tangible example. So what it is again, these systems are trained on tokens of words. So again, from a scale perspective, it's hard to comprehend, but Wikipedia was 1% of the data that ChatGPT was trained on, right? Just to give you a sense. By the end of next year, it will likely, they think these frontier models will be trained on all human digital knowledge, right? So the scale is sort of unfathomable. But the goal of these systems is to generate new content based on the patterns that it has seen. It's been trained on fiction, Reddit, Wikipedia, it's been sort of trained on everything. And while there is sort of like a consensus to, most of our knowledge and how it's been codified, master's degree in information science, so I get really passionate about this. The point of the system is to generate new content. It's not to provide the right answer, right? And so it's a feature, not a bug. So when we call it a hallucination, it's just because it's doing pretty much exactly what it's designed to do, which is to make up something, right? And so we still have to kind of figure out what the implications of that at scale. A tangible example of this, and I will find when I send the slides, I'll send this link too, because I think it's a really interesting research paper. The research team in Anthropic has been doing really amazing work to understand how these things work underneath the hood, because they're still pretty much a black box. They did this really interesting exercise where they told an LLM that it was the San Francisco Bridge, right? Like act like the bridge. And what they found was that certain parts of the model lit up when they did that. I think they're called neurons, where it's just like your brain, like it's different parts of your brain lit up. And from that point on, it could not answer any question that was not from the perspective of the bridge. It was like, I see the sun coming over the bay in the morning and the fog rolling in, right? So there's something with the way that these systems are inherently designed and work that produce these answers. And that is, again, sort of the implementation gap, right? Because in certain contexts, you can't have that ambiguity. Creativity is not like what is needed, right? And so your implementation, the way that you guide your solution matters, because it's just that you will always, hallucinations will always be part of these systems.
Got it. Thank you, Jen.
Of course.
Other questions or comments for anyone? David, they're going to make me do it. This is question 3 in my list of 15, and you'll be getting these by email, Jen. One more question, and you kind of alluded to this idea that it's a feature, not a bug. In the early days of the conversation, there was a lot of consternation around the inputs of data that AI and LLMs are consuming. And you might have remembered some of the folks saying, well, don't feed it disinformation. I think the perspective has been disinformation is part of the data it needs to understand. Am I misunderstanding the data consumption of LLMs in that context?
Yeah, so you're right that this is a huge tension in the research community, right? Is which data gets fed, how it gets fed, and in what context it gets fed. And again, you have to think about the goal of many of these frontier models is to create like AI general intelligence. Honestly, it's probably super intelligence at this point, but really to kind of create this AI model that can do all of the things. In our human context, there are arguments for, well, if it's going to operate in our world, it has to be given all the things, right? But it needs to be done in this particular way or in this particular context. And that's where you get these like ethical debates, right? That's where this like responsible AI theme starts coming in. Again, nobody has the answer there, right? It's like, but I think what's important is that the frontier models are transparent, which is where people get the most frustrated because it is unclear how they use that kind of information and what implications that it has for the model.
Jen, thanks so much. Greg, did you have something, buddy?
I'm just sort of thinking about this disinformation thing. This is not really part of the, oh, it is, I guess. If you go back to your comment, Jen, about, oh, by the way, thanks for the presentation. It was really good. If you go back to your comment in terms of decentralized and centralized AI systems, and then you overlay that with the information that is coming into it, where you might have some sort of disconnect between the information coming in, which might be coming in from decentralized sources or individual sources, and then somewhat curated by the centralized source. Do you not have a very similar kind of thing if you're sort of likening it to a blockchain where you've got, bad actors running nodes and good actors running nodes? If you have so many bad actors running nodes, you don't have a way to kick out, or sorry, if you have so many bad actors feeding information, there's no way to kick out that bad information, verify it with good, kick out bad information so that the information there is actually true. And the danger, and I think this is what everyone thinks about generally, is that bad information or the misinformation or what have you becomes the information because it's dominated.
Yes.
So you don't have this sort of filter, or you will. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And one of the reasons why I I pointed out the sort of
stupid,
the tension, right? What again, what frontier model founders will tell you is that we've got teams for that, right? It's like we're beating, we're gonna try to figure out how to do truth and certification and all of that, right? But the point to this is happening in a centralized team where nobody really knows the decisions being made. you can influence the way that a model works by giving it basically like either trying to break it, manipulate it, give it bad information. That is something that we're going to have to contend with again at scale. And we haven't even scratched the surface of that. And you can really, these things can really have some bad outcomes if, you know, you sort of go towards that, like, you know, master manipulation, which is, again, why I mentioned things like quantum, because the speed and scale that that can happen when and if we crack that is kind of like, you know, doomsday, right? It's like I don't ever like to be that, you know, I like to have a more practical approach to that, but it really is something to think about, and is something that we're going to have to contend with.
Yeah, yeah, like even in a computerized world, it still takes way longer to verify the information than it does to create the information. You know,
Yes.
like a truthful event, like I walked out my front door and got in my car. That's
Yes.
a truthful event. It takes some time to verify that, or even
That's right.
something even more relevant, like I murdered somebody, and it
Yes.
takes me 2 years to come to trial.
Yes. Right.
So the verification of that truth
Yes.
takes ages.
And again, the solve from the AI community has been like, oh, we'll just throw AI at it, right?
Yeah.
And so that is something that we're going to
Yeah.
have to deal with. Yeah.
Okay.
Greg, thanks for the question. Jen, again, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. We'll have to have you back. If anyone had questions for Jen, let us know. We'll reach out to her. Again, Jen, thank you so much. We're going to leave it there. We'll see you next time.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.